Pete, it's interesting because Eric's talking about how this has infected the corporations. You've been fighting this thing forever. I actually remember that one of the real moments that I woke up to all of this was when you invited me to speak at Portland State University, and it was me, you, and Christina Hoff Sommers, and Antifa showed up, and they said that you were a white supremacist, and I was a homophobe, and Christina hated women, and police had to escort us, and also Andy No, who was just a young kid at the time, who now is like one of the prime fighters of this. He was there. Right. But you've been doing it on the campus thing, and everyone kept saying to us, hey, it's staying on the campuses, you guys are nuts. And to Eric's point, it's everywhere now. So what can we do? What can we actually do and not just talk about it?
Okay, so I'll speak to what we can do about it on the campuses, and then I'll speak to what we can do about it in our own lives. One word that's come up over and over again is grievance. And our universities and institutions have gone from engines of knowledge production to engines of grievance indoctrination. And that's what we're seeing now. The perennial and perpetual feeding into you have to find this grievance. Any disparity is because of something systemically racist. I mean, there is a whole system in place to indoctrinate young people. So that is a problem. I've talked about the ways to get out of that. You basically have ways to get around ideology or how do you place truth front and center to that? I will be very blunt with you. I used to be Pollyanna about the universities, thinking they would change. I no longer believe that's possible. I think we need new institutions, and the pandemic has expedited that, and we may very soon. We've already seen the collapse of smaller universities. Tier 1 universities will be fine. So part of that is that we've created a monoculture in which people don't hear the other side. I mentioned before the call started that when I teach my atheism class, I often have people come into the class who don't share my worldview because of what Mill said about it's not good enough that they hear it. They have to hear it from people who believe it. In my pseudoscience and pseudoscience class, I have people come in who talk about UFO abductions, or Mark Sargent, who's one of the leaders in the flat earth movement, give the best arguments that he can for why he believes the earth is flat. Those arguments now are different from anything dealing with certain morally taboo issues like protected classes, which is an entirely different story because we're not allowed. For example, I have been more or less read the Riot Act about in a university, and I teach ethics and I teach critical thinking about rendering my views about protected classes, et cetera. So the universities are in crisis right now. The second thing is, when you were taught your whole life and to find grievance, particularly kids, my daughters, I'm wondering if this is a mistake that I say this, but my daughter's math assignment was to draw, my daughter's health assignment was in health class was to draw a picture of a black person. My daughter's assignment in math class was to find watch African-American films on TV about how African-Americans have been wiped out of history. Now, I think the latter is extremely important, but not in math class. So that even the traditional structures of this is what you teach in math, this is what you teach, all of those things have been undermined. But okay, so back to the point, what do we do about it? There's so much grievance everywhere, and we're teaching people in schools to find grievance. Here's something that I do. As you know, I'm an atheist. I don't think there's sufficient evidence to justify belief in God or miracles or any divine intervention. And so I don't pray. But what we do is we have a family dinner every night, and we go around the table and we say what we are grateful for. Every person says what they're grateful for. And it's amazing how just showing a little gratitude for something in your life washes away so much of that grievance. So we have to start adopting practices, not only more broadly to repudiate grievance ideology, but in our own lives to forefront other things like, truth. Or if the rabbi and Eric would say faith, that's not my thing, but find something to push the idea that there are constant perpetual grievances popping up everywhere, and replace that with something more productive to help people live more meaningful lives. So it's very interesting to me having this conversation and being on with folks, and I'm familiar with everyone's work here, the Rabbi's work and Eric's work. And what's interesting to me is what's so important now wasn't important before. And this is interesting how the culture has shifted and the times have shifted. So now metaphysics is really unimportant, whether there was a talking snake, whether someone walked on water. It just seems like such quaint questions, and having debates about these things seems so rather silly. I think what's important now is that we all share a mutual threat, and that is we're in the middle of a cultural revolution, and we see that the society is under siege by maniacs who've taken control of our institutions. And it could very well be that Eric's story is a simple example of that, where people try to take away our liberties. I can't speak to that, but I think that you're right, Dave, that wokeism, it's a universal solvent. It is the Achilles heel of not just liberalism, but it destroys absolutely everything it touches, even the Southern Baptists. And so what I think is really important in this conversation are some of the things that three people of different backgrounds can agree upon. And I'll throw this out, possibly as a conversation starter. We all agree on the rules of engagement. So those rules of engagement are conversation, like we're having now, I guess debate if you have to, but they're dialectical, they're speech. So we agree on that. I'm not going to call David, I was going to say something that I probably shouldn't.
Some bad name.
David,
Exactly.
A bad name.
Try not to get me booted off YouTube. I've already got Metaxas on here. Come on.
So I'm not gonna smear people. We're gonna converse in good faith. We're gonna have that conversation, and we're gonna be willing. Certainly, I would sincerely say I'd be willing to change my mind, and my guess is that your guest would too, if presented with sufficient evidence. So we agree upon that. The other thing is we agree upon a correspondence theory of reality. So we think that we can come to truth not based upon our subjective experiences of, or let me put it this way: we all believe that we can come to truth not based upon one's immutable characteristics, the color of our skin or what have you. That doesn't limit us from finding the truth. And those two rules the rules of engagement and the idea that your immutable characteristics don't, particularly race or sexual orientation or gender, don't prevent you from finding the truth, means that the three of us have more in common right now than what we see as the reigning moral orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Can I add, I certainly agree with that, but I'd like to add another characteristic and bring in the other side here, which is that the degree of your indignance or your anger is no indicator of the degree of the correctness of your views. And this is a malady, left and right. I see it from both sides, and I get it as I'm sure you sometimes do on my Twitter and on my Facebook from both sides. People who are incapable of containing their rage, and they're convinced that their rage proves how just
Correct.
they are and how right they are, and that is a poison. It's a sort of ecumenical toxic poison that is moving through our system, and is making it really difficult to talk across the political divide. And the last thing that I would also say is, my guess is, although I don't know everybody on this call well enough to say this, but I'm going to make the guess nonetheless. Unfortunately, for much of America, since there is no shared culture anymore, everything is politics. You can't be sure that someone else has read the same books or listened to the same music or whatever. The one thing you can be sure of is that you share the possibility of talking about politics. And the recognition that there is much, much more to life than politics alone is a recognition that would help America a lot, because now everything is politicized and it's not good.